What is creativity in psychology? We often think of creativity as something mystical, reserved for the gifted few, or sparked by some sudden flash of inspiration. But what if the way we understand it is missing the point? The truth about creativity might surprise you. It's not about being a genius or having a moment of brilliance. In fact, it's both more accessible and more complex than you might think. Stick with me, and by the end of this, you'll see creativity in a new light. We're going to explore what's really behind the creative process and why the common ideas about it just don't hold up. The myth of the lone genius, like Beethoven, who, despite his deafness and reclusive nature, supposedly summoned musical brilliance from thin air, is compelling, but it's a fantasy. It's easy to romanticize this image of creativity, where the genius is struck by a sudden, brilliant idea, isolated from the world. But that's not how creativity really works. A 2024 study on jazz musicians, for example, found that creativity was linked to less activity in the brain's frontal lobes, suggesting that the most creative moments happen when we let go of conscious control. Creativity isn't about trying harder or thinking deeper, it's about tapping into automatic processes, allowing the brain to connect ideas without interference. This challenges the notion that creativity is solely about raw talent or deliberate effort. Then there's the default mode network in the brain, which activates when your mind is wandering, daydreaming, or at rest. Studies show this network plays a critical role in creative thinking. It suggests that creativity isn't the product of intense focus, but a result of letting your mind drift, challenging yet another common belief that creativity stems from a concentrated burst of genius. This is where the myth of creativity begins to unravel. Art is communication springing from unconscious levels. Rollo, Love and Will. The existential psychologist Rollo believed that creativity arises from anxiety, from the tension between fear and courage. In his book, The Courage to Create, he argued that modern life is defined by existential anxiety, the fear that nothing we do matters, heightened by global threats and personal crises. Yet, May said that this anxiety is what pushes us to create. Creativity, according to May, is not a luxury. It's a survival mechanism. It's what allows us to transform our fear, our brokenness, into something meaningful. May's vision of creativity wasn't about inspiration or talent. It was about courage. The courage to face the chaos of existence and to turn that chaos into art. The artist presents the broken image of man, but transcends it in the very act of transmuting it into art. It is his creative act which gives meaning to the nihilism, alienation, and other elements of modern man's condition. Rollo, Love and Will. This brings us to another important point. Creativity isn't limited to artists or musicians. May argued that anyone, from any walk of life, can be creative if they find the courage to engage with the world authentically. Humanistic psychologist Carl Rogers believed that creativity was a natural outcome of becoming your true self. As you become more and more who you are, you start to be the type of person from whom creative products and creative living emerge. Carl Rogers on Becoming a Person. As we accept all aspects of who we are, Rogers said, we unlock the potential for creativity in every area of life. According to Rogers, creativity isn't just about artistic pursuits, it's about how we approach life itself. For Rogers, creativity was connected to emotional openness and psychological freedom. He argued that most people live as consumers, following rules, taking orders, but true creativity emerges when we break free from those constraints. This aligns with research by Nancy Andreessen, who found that creativity involves both emotional and neurological flexibility. The more open we are, the more creative we become. And here's the twist. Creativity, in Rogers' view, isn't just something you're born with. It's something you can cultivate, something that emerges as you grow and evolve as a person. Rogers defined the creative process as the emergence and action of a novel relational product, growing out of the uniqueness of the individual on the one hand and the materials, events, people, or circumstances of his life on the other. Carl Rogers on Becoming a Person. For Rogers, there was no distinction between artistic creativity and scientific creativity. They both fell under the rubric of novel relational products. This begs the question then, what is the connection between creativity and intelligence, if any? Now, let's get into the controversial relationship between creativity and intelligence. For years, psychologists have debated whether the two are closely related or distinct abilities. The threshold theory suggests a moderate link. Intelligence is necessary for creativity up to a point, but after reaching an IQ of around 120, intelligence and creativity don't seem to correlate much. In essence, you need to be smart, but being smarter doesn't necessarily make you more creative. But then, the study of mathematically precocious youth turned this theory on its head. This decades long study tracks some of the most intellectually gifted individuals in the world. The results? The top 1% of the smartest participants achieve significantly more creative outcomes, measured through patents, academic publications, and professional achievements, than those in the bottom 25% of the top 1%. So even within the top 1%, there were vast differences between those in the top 0.1% and the rest. Now, this research challenges the idea that there's a threshold of intelligence beyond which creativity no longer increases. In fact, it suggests that higher intelligence is linked to greater creative output, even at the most elite intellectual levels. But if intelligence isn't the whole story, what is? Cognitive psychology tells us that creativity often involves recombining existing concepts rather than producing entirely novel ideas. Analogical thinking and pattern recognition allow the brain to connect unrelated ideas in innovative ways. This is a key aspect of creativity. It's not always about inventing something new, but about seeing old things in a new light. Now, this connects kind of weirdly and deeply with Carl Jung's idea of the collective unconscious. Jung believed that archetypes, universal human patterns of behavior, exist in all of us, manifesting in different forms based on individual experiences. Like the cognitive psychologist concept of recombination, Jung's archetypes suggest that what we consider creative is often just a reshuffling of existing ideas and concepts embedded deep within us. Another surprising insight comes from research on constraints. We often think of creativity as boundless freedom, but studies show that when we face limitations, like time pressure or limited resources, we're actually more likely to come up with creative solutions. Far from being stifling, constraints force our brains to think in divergent ways. This brings us back to the question, is creativity an inherent trait or can it be developed? Findings suggest that creativity is not some inborn gift, but a skill you can cultivate. Expertise plays a huge role. The more you practice, the more creative insights emerge. The notion of practice-induced creativity argues that, over time, skills become automatic, allowing the brain to enter a flow state where creative ideas flourish. So, what's the real story behind creativity? It's not the romanticized myth of the lone genius or an innate trait that only a select few are born with. Creativity, as we've explored, is much more complex. It's a skill shaped by practice, constraints, emotional openness, and even intelligence. It's less about a flash of inspiration and more about recombining ideas, often unconsciously, into something new. The idea that creativity comes from a unique, divine spark is a bit outdated. Instead, it's a deeply human process, one grounded in experience, hard work, and even the challenges we face. Carl Rogers saw creativity as a product of authentic living, not an isolated act of brilliance. Carl Jung believed in the collective unconscious, suggesting that much of what we call creative is simply reconfigurations of shared human experiences. The study of mathematically precocious youth challenges the notion that intelligence and creativity hit a threshold, showing that even the most intellectually elite continue to benefit from greater intelligence in producing creative outcomes. And as studies show, constraints and cognitive recombination play critical roles in pushing our brains to generate creative ideas. The myth of creativity isn't just that it's rare or special, it's that we misunderstand where it comes from. The truth, creativity is within reach for all of us. It's a product of effort, experience, and context. If you guys like this video, then check out my video on why happiness and positive psychology is not what you think it is.